Contagion is a film directed by Steven Soderbergh about a pandemic of a very fatal airborne virus spreading throughout the entire world. The film follows an ensemble of different characters as they all scramble to combat, avoid, and even publicize the disease. A film directed in the year 2011, which is particularly impressive considering its prophetic qualities. As all of you who are furiously practicing your social distancing right now probably know, our world is going through a pretty similar situation right now. Minus the very fatal part, thankfully. So as I sat down in my dark, damp basement at 10 a.m. this morning to watch Contagion, I knew that I'd be able to tell if the filmmakers here really did their homework or not. And yes, there will most certainly be spoilers in this video. One thing I love about this movie is that pretty much every projection made in the script is one that has come true, or got pretty close to being true. From people in power hesitating to react in a seemingly drastic way to citizens trying to social distance themselves as best they can. There are just so many fascinating predictions on display here that manage to keep me interested throughout the somewhat scattered story. The film even manages to give the disease a bat-carried origin. It's really no surprise that the writer, Scott Z. Burns, extensively researched epidemic trends and even consulted a many number of physicians and scientists during his writing process. While discussing the film with the journalist from The Hollywood Reporter, Burns stated, quote, "On one hand, someone might say, that's uncanny. But I'm not that surprised because when I spoke to experts in this field, they all said to me that it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. What I learned from these scientists is that these things are going to happen." End quote. So I wouldn't say that the prophetic nature of this film is completely out of left field, but it's still rather impressive that he was able to formulate these reactions from society 9 years before it happened. Especially in how panic is discussed in the film. Characters and officials are constantly talking about panic and how they don't want to perpetuate it any more than it already is. Surprise, surprise, the population becomes overwhelmed with mass confusion and anxiety, and it proves to become just as damaging as the disease itself. Although the film doesn't necessarily have people inhaling toilet paper off the Walmart shelves, it's still a decent parallel to how people are reacting to old COVID over here. Although I would say that the pandemonium wasn't touched upon as much as I would have liked, but it's still a substantive addition to the film, along with many other tie-ins to this coronavirus outbreak. But really, the film doesn't even need this crutch of a modern-day outbreak to keep things interesting throughout the runtime. Even though the connections to present day are pretty enjoyable on their own, the film is also incredibly effective in freaking you out. It takes time to show an immense amount of close-ups on normal everyday actions that we all perform, but in this context, it's incredibly disturbing. The fact that these characters are spreading a silent, invisible, killing machine without even knowing really just sends a shiver straight down my spine. And it's made all the worse by Soderbergh because he uses a plethora of different techniques that contribute to the sickly nature of the film. He added a very shallow depth of field to most of these close-ups in order to draw emphasis on the spreading of these germs. He edited the frequent montages in a frantic way to add a prominent feeling of confusion, and he even color corrected many shots to have a yellowish tint to them that makes me ill to look at. It does bother me that this hue of yellow isn't really consistent throughout the entire film, but it is there enough to make me appreciate it. And the music. Oh my gosh, the music is this high-octane combination of muffled notes that drag me straight over to the edge of my seat. So what I'm trying to say here is that this movie makes me a little bit anxious. Now, I think it's pretty safe to say that these two fine gentlemen over here succeeded in capturing the confusion of these characters. But if I'm being honest, some of the confusion in these stories interested me a little less than others. The film centers around a wide variety of characters, each with different circumstances that they must maneuver through. A couple of CDC people trying to suppress the disease and panic, a World Health Organization scientist, or as I like to say it, a WHO scientist, who travels to Hong Kong to trace the origin of the outbreak, and an everyday dad whose wife and son were tragically taken by the virus. There was also an internet reporter obsessed with painting the CDC in a bad light, but his story was at best mildly intriguing, and I really just don't have much to say about it. I would say that I connected best with the dad, played by Matt Damon, just because he's the most relatable person here to me. This perspective of an everyday dude who's just trying to survive the pandemic resonates with me much more than these high-up CDC people or the government officials. I wish that the movie spent a little more time with how the outbreak directly affected society as a whole. I found myself growing pretty tired of these countless scenes talking about the structure of the disease, the vaccination process, the construction of medical areas, the mutation of the disease. Although, to be fair, these plot lines were much more competent than anything this WHO scientist could muster up. This thing was so uninteresting from beginning to end, mainly due to the information she uncovers being so insignificant. They explain in the film that she's an epidemiologist tasked with pinpointing the origin of the disease.
It's also why the World Health Organization is sending an epidemiologist to Hong Kong. It's hard to know what it is without knowing where it came from, so our first job with these things is always to find ground zero, figure out how it jumped into the population to begin with.
But the origin is just such an unimportant piece of information that they could have just revealed it at the beginning. There was certainly no need to build up anticipation to a reveal, which is what the film very oddly does. The real kicker, though, is that halfway through the movie, she gets captured by a local village that tries to ransom her off for vaccines. And then this whole thing concludes with her being friendly with the village and placebos and her feeling bad for them. The entire plotline could have just been thrown out because it didn't really contribute anything to the film. This combined with the large amount of CDC scenes really had me snoozing quite a bit here and there. But besides some bland characters and plot beats here and there, this is a fascinating and nerve-wracking film that deserves a watch for sure. Although by the looks of it, it seems like most people were way ahead of me in that department. Good to know that there's lots of other people out there willing to freak themselves out during this quarantine. Remember to keep safe out there, folks. And on that note, I bid you all a farewell.